So good evening, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of our series on drug discovery beyond the bench, where we're looking at different industry careers from molecule to prescription and from bench to bedside. If you had attended yesterday's event, we're really thrilled to have you back again this evening, where you'll be learning about a different set of new and interesting career paths. So we have 5 fantastic panelists here tonight who will be participating in both the panel discussion and the speed networking afterwards. If everyone in the audience, even if you didn't register on Eventbrite for the speed networking, you are welcome to stay and encouraged to do so. We're going to be in the same Zoom meeting the whole night, so we encourage you to stay for both parts of the event, regardless if you were able to register ahead of time. So our 5 professionals who you will be meeting tonight work in tech transfer, business development, regulatory affairs, medical affairs and medical science liaison, and finally medical communications. And I'm just going to briefly introduce our panelists now. First, we have Ankit Shah, who works at the FDA. Next, we have Eileen Gagan, who works at Actinium Pharmaceuticals. Third is Kanan Krishnamurthy, who works in business development and licensing at MSK. Fourth is Minji, who is a medical science liaison at Eli Lilly. And last but not least, Shweta Varshini, who works at Dudnik, which is a medical communications agency. And my co-hosts are coming from INet, as well as STEMPeers, and I'm Thaliana Stathis from Memorial Sloan Kettering. My co-hosts from INet are Melanie Mahay and Matthew Bafuto and Lori Herviu. And from STEMPeers, we have Abhi Day and Devanjana Chatterjee. So if you were with us yesterday, it's the same co-host from yesterday as well, who you will see in all of the speed networking breakout rooms. Before we launch into the panel discussion, Melanie wanted to just say a few quick words about INet, just to introduce that to everybody. So Melanie, please go ahead and just introduce INet to the group.
So hi everyone, and thank you Taliana for the introduction, and thanks to all the panelists for accepting our invitation to share your experience, and to all the attendees, of course, for being here with us tonight. So I'm Melanie, I'm a board member of INet NYC. So INet NYC stands for International Networking New York City and has been founded in 2014. And the aim of this association is to first support and offer professional development opportunities for international scientists in training STEM in the New York City area, as well as help community building and facilitate connection between international scientists. So our board members and scientists from the different NYC research institutions are working to organize career development and social events, reaching a large network of more than 900 members, who are for the most part foreign scientists still in training. So I wanted to mention that our next event will be in January 12th, and the topic will be science policy, diversity and inclusion. So feel free to join and be with us. So you can find more information on our website. And you can also subscribe to become a member and receive monthly our newsletter. And if you want to be more involved, you can also go on your website and apply for open position on your board. So importantly, you can also find us on different social media, such as LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And with that, I would like to thank all our board members, our advisory board, and of course, INet NYC founders, Ariola and Mike. And I would like to acknowledge of the organization that have supported our events so far, as well as our collaborators, especially MSKCC and STEMPeers, with whom we are organizing this event tonight. And I will now let Abhi present STEMPeers. Thank you.
Thank you, Taliana, and thank you, Melanie. Yeah, I'm here to represent STEMPeers, and as well, we as an organization, we are a global organization which run on the similar lines as Melanie explained for INet, and our organization definitely works with multiple initiatives as well as multiple collaborators on on the theme of career development and skill development. In the past 5 years, we have generated multiple platforms through our global network, which focus on science communication, business development, as well as we organize many career development events across the globe. And that has resulted in huge membership of 17,000 members in our Facebook community. And it's a pleasure for me to co-host this event with INet for the second time, and MSKCC. We started this event last year when it was the first event, and we had in-person gathering, and it was a great kickoff to this series of conference, which we are now holding on an annual basis. Because of COVID, yes, we shifted the concept a little bit this time, and we are holding this event for 2 days. And it's my pleasure to welcome so many distinguished panelists today. My co-host Debanjana, who is representing STEMPeers, she will be moderating the panel. I will be supporting the online questions that will be coming in. And with that, I would like to pass on the mic to Taliana for the quick poll.
Thank you, Abhi. Yes, we want the panelists to have an understanding of who is in the audience. So we have 2 very quick questions for you to answer. Please just take 2 seconds to answer these questions about who you are, so that the panelists know who everybody is in the audience. All righty, most people have voted. Gonna wait 2 more seconds and okay. The results are in. So today we have slightly more graduate students than postdocs. It's almost even, 37, 35%. Those are the top 2 categories. And most people are from New York City, 70%, with 17% from the Northeast area. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll, and I would like to now have Debanjana get started with the panel discussion. And just to remind everybody in the audience, if you do want to turn your camera on now, we would be happy to see you. We definitely would hope that you are able to turn it on for the speed networking in part 2. And if you, like Abhi said, he will be monitoring the chat. So please submit any questions that you have during the panel discussion in the chat, and we will do our best to incorporate them. All right, over to Debanjana.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today and to have all the panelists here who are from such diverse fields to share their wisdom with us. So we would start with like a first round of introductions where we would like each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves, explain what their current roles are, what kind of research they did in their PhD or postdoctoral training, and then what was the career path they more or less followed from their PhD, their postdoc positions to their current jobs. So maybe we can start with Eileen.
Sure. Thankfully, you sent those questions ahead of time, so I can also just go down the list. So hi, everyone. I'm Eileen Gagan. I'm currently Associate Director of Strategic Research and Business Development at Actinium Pharmaceuticals. We're a small biotech in New York City. We have 2 clinical stage assets and platform technology based on antibody radioconjugate technology for oncology. Okay, so the questions were, you want me to answer each of those questions now?
You can you can just go with your own flow. It's basically what we would like to know, that what kind of research were you doing like in academia? Then, what piqued your curiosity about your current position? How did you and how did you decide on this particular job that you have, or like the role that you have, and your path?
Okay. Yeah, so my PhD training and 2 postdocs were actually all in virology. And actually, here I am in an oncology company. So that was a bit of a switch for me. But the important thing that I was always working towards was I did know that I wanted to transition into industry. I think when I was still a postdoc, I thought that I would get a scientist position in industry and then kind of work my way up as a scientist to eventually my goal was to have more of like a strategic planning role in a biotech. But I'm actually really, I feel really fortunate that I think I've kind of short-circuited that path in that I was able to get this position at Actinium a few years ago, which is a hybrid between R&D and business development that lets me do both of those things.
Okay, that's very interesting. So maybe we will move on to Ankit, and maybe you can introduce like your path, how you got here, and what made you choose this current track.
Sure. So my name is Ankit Shah. I am a clinical pharmacology reviewer at the US FDA. My journey is kind of similar to Eileen in the sense that I also have a background in virology, but not necessarily focused on the virology. My research was more on the neuroimmune pharmacology with the HIV infection and neuroAIDS. And so that was kind of like the background with the basic biology and basic science. That combined with pharmacology and toxicology information that I have from my bachelor's degree back in India, I combined that to get into more translational sciences. So I got 2 postdoctoral fellowships. One of them was within the same lab that I graduated from, and the second one was at the NCI, in which I was looking more into the nanoformulations for anti-cancer medicines. And that kind of carved my path to come to the FDA because the research was highly translational. Not only that, it was more regulatory framework kind of research. So that kind of helped me navigate into the FDA. And then initially I joined the FDA as a non-clinical pharmacology reviewer. It's been about 4.5 months that I've actually transitioned into a new role in which I'm looking at more of a clinical pharmacology review work. And so I'm enjoying so far the whole, diversity of the applications that I look at. And coincidentally, I'm actually working in the oncology field. So it's very relevant to what I did in my postdoctoral fellowship at NCI.
Okay, so I think we can learn from both of your stories that even though, say, our graduate training was something else, there's always this possibility to switch as biologists because I think we have basic like biological knowledge and we can apply that to a different stream as well. So next we will move on to Minji and we will learn what has been her path so far.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Minji Ah. I am a medical science liaison at Eli Lilly and Company within the oncology business unit. My research background, I guess my PhD was in molecular biology. I think that's a pretty blanket term, but I worked in a primarily developmental biology lab. We were interested in understanding the vasculature, both blood and lymphatic vasculature in development, as well as in various different pathological states. And so my particular project happened to be oncology focused. I think I was probably one of the few people in the lab that kind of chose that type of project because I was always interested in, doing something within oncology. I think I knew pretty early on within my PhD that I didn't want to stay in academia, that I wanted to transition over to industry. I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do within industry, but I did know that I didn't want to be at the bench per se, but more utilize my skills and kind of understanding of the science to do something a little bit different. And so following my PhD, I briefly stayed in the lab, the same lab, to do I think it was like 6 months postdoc while actively searching for other positions. And then I transitioned over into being a medical writer at I guess, medium-sized medical communications agency within New York, stayed there for about 3 years. And I believe that particular role helped me to transition into the medical science liaison role that I'm in today.
Okay, great. So next, maybe Shweta, you can introduce about your PhD training and then how did you find your current role and where are you working and your job responsibilities a little bit?
Sure. Hi, team. So I am Shweta Vashne. I work as an associate scientific director at Tutnik, and it's basically pharmaceutical advertising firm. And the way I made my path here was that my PhD and postdoc both were in molecular biology, PhD in focusing on ophthalmology, and postdoc focusing on disease. And again, early on, as the other panelist, I knew that I would not be staying longer in academia. So I had collaborated a lot with STEMPeers, and what I used to do in New York, I was based in out of New York City previously. So I used to run these coffee chats where I used to invite people who have transitioned from academia to other things like maybe science, medical science liaison or medical communication roles. And I thought that medical communication is something that I would like to focus on. But with medical communication, I was interested in strategy. So initially, my first move out of postdoc was at another medical communication agency, but I took an account role because I was more interested into strategy. And very soon, within a year, I realized that the account role was not suited for me. So then I moved over to DUDNIC in a more scientific role. And here, my day-to-day activities involve collaborating with copywriters or creative teams like art people and delivering the client requirement, basically converting complex science into simpler language. Sorry, my dog also wants to pitch in, so I'm really sorry if you can hear all that background noise. I'm sure he wants to provide his insights too to everyone or agree with what I'm saying. So yeah, basically last year I moved into the scientific role, and so far the journey has been good, and I would be happy to answer any questions related to Medcom.
Okay, great. So from Shweta, now we can talk to Kanan. So Kanan is currently in Sloan Kettering, and he's in business development and licensing. So Kanan, would you like to tell us something about how you found this path? What was your previous training, and how has been your journey so far?
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. I got my PhD at the Medical College of Georgia in a small town called Augusta, Georgia. My PhD work was in cell and developmental biology. I did research on embryonic stem cells at a time where there was a lot of both interest and hype about the potential of embryonic stem cells. So it was a very exciting time to be doing that. I've had during my PhD, I had an interest in oncology. So for my postdoc, I moved to Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories outside New York on Long Island to work in a cancer biology lab. And there I did, we did breast cancer research. We studied breast cancer in 3D organoid models, again, in the early days of when organoids and 3D model systems were sort of, were becoming more popular. And at Cold Spring Harbor, we also collaborated with another lab that was testing sort of a novel inhibitor in these mouse models of cancer that our lab had. So that sort of gave me some exposure to, preclinical drug discovery, drug development, if you will. Like the others have already mentioned, I knew early on I didn't want to continue in academia. So I spent over a year, I would say, during my postdoc, exploring other options and applying to other kinds of jobs, including medical communication, our consulting positions, and I looked at tech transfer as well. So I joined in an entry-level position at the tech transfer office at Sloan Kettering. I do business development and licensing. Our job involves sort of evaluating new discoveries and inventions that come out of MSK labs, and then working with patent attorneys to protect these new ideas, and then working with people like Eileen to pitch these ideas to companies that might be interested in developing these early stage discoveries from MSK. So yeah, the goal of our office is to translate these early stage discoveries from MSK labs into new and useful products that might benefit patients. And we do that by partnering with companies for the most part. And my job is to make that happen.
Okay, that's a great introduction. Thank you so much. So I wanted to ask that when you started applying for like positions outside like the traditional academic track, and so what kind of skills did you highlight in your CV that might have helped you land this position?
Am I going to keep going?
Yeah, yes,
Oh,
yeah, you can.
right,
Yeah.
right. I've been in this role about 8 years. So, just so, I applied a while ago, but I think some of these things might still hold true. The position I applied to was an entry-level position in the office where they were looking for somebody with a strong scientific background. So I think, even for people looking not to be in the lab, for a lot of jobs, uh, with marketing sort of your scientific capabilities is still helpful. So, showing that I had a strong scientific background, a strong publication record, I think certainly helped. Because in my role, at least, I spent a lot of time talking with investigators at MSK, and they're explaining their new discoveries to me. So being able to sort of hold a conversation with them and understand what they're saying is a really important part of my job. If I can't understand what they're doing, I can't explain that to somebody else. I can't pitch that to a company and sell that. So that was really important skill, I think, in this case. The other things were, problem solving abilities, analytical thinking, and good communication skills. So communication is an important part of what I do with internal stakeholders at MSK, if they are investigators, people in senior management, or when we are pitching to companies outside MSK. So both written and oral communication is an important part of my job. And I think highlighting that was helpful in making my transition, I would say.
Okay, thank you, Kannan. So next, I wanted to ask Minji that, like you already mentioned that your role, your previous position as a medical writer might have helped you switch to the MSL position. But so when you applied for these positions, were there other skills that you highlighted apart from the medical writing? Did you also become part of, like there are these professional MSL societies, like or there are also now some board certifications. Do you recommend like anything like that for like PhDs who are looking to transition to MSL roles?
Sure. Well, I think I'd start off by saying, and I think this point was highlighted earlier too, that, whatever project you worked on or whatever area of focus you had within your PhD and potentially postdoc training, I think doesn't necessarily limit you in terms of, if you did virology, you have to work, within virology in your next position. I think the key thing that all PhDs, can highlight is that you have the ability to learn, highly scientific information and get a deep understanding, and then be able to apply that to various different things, and also the ability to learn new things. So I think that that's a skill that all PhDs have that you can highlight regardless of what role you're going into. In regards to the board certification and the MSL societies, I have seen those pop up more recently. I don't know honestly how new they are, but I do see a lot of activity kind of on LinkedIn and things like that. So I wasn't aware of those opportunities, to be honest, when I was applying for jobs. So I can't necessarily speak to whether they're useful or not. I do have a colleague within the MSL organization that I work in, who I think went through the MSL society. They have some trainings, and I think they have some like internal networking and job boards and things like that. And I believe that was how he came into the company. So I can speak from, I guess, indirect experience from one of my coworkers to say that that's a potential way to get in.
Yeah. So how important a role did you think that networking played in you landing your first position out of academia?
I think it was very important. I mean, I still remember that the medical communications job that I got out of my PhD was through a connection with a friend. So it was somebody who had been in the same program as me at Columbia. She was a few years ahead of me and worked at this company, this medcoms company. And I was able to, connect with her and understand, because I saw these job postings. I didn't really know what medcoms was at the time. And speaking with her kind of one-on-one helped me, understand the role better, got me excited about that opportunity. And then she was able to basically provide a referral for me for the job. And then also networking within or leading to the MSL position was helpful because, connecting with other people that I knew peripherally sort of that were MSLs, they helped me kind of prepare for the interviewing process, as well as kind of understand what the day-to-day responsibilities of the job would be. So I think I would say networking is definitely very important.
Okay, thank you so much, Minji. So now moving on to Eileen, I wanted to ask you, did you have the same experience that how important was networking or informational interviews with people in landing your first job out of academia?
I think in my example, it's actually one of those really annoying instances of just chance. um, so I was part of the STEMPeers Facebook group, and someone there had posted something that they had seen on LinkedIn, and it wasn't a position that had been officially advertised yet. And so I just connected with that person on LinkedIn and sent my resume. And I did have to kind of pursue the opportunity. I didn't hear back from her. She initially, acknowledged that she received it, but then I didn't hear back from her. And I followed up. We had a short interview, and then I actually happened to run into her at I don't even remember what the event was, but in New York City, some sort of science networking event. And so I was like legitimately terrified, but I cornered this woman and was like, hey, remember me? And it ended up working out. She, remembered who I was, and I was able to express, my enthusiasm, and we had a nice chat. And that, I think, really kind of brought me up to the front of the candidates. But I mean, really, if I hadn't run into her at that event, I'm not sure, what would have happened. I think one thing that I try to, now that I'm in, my current role, and I actually am sometimes in the position of evaluating resumes and interviewing people, one of the most important things that I think gets people's attention is you need to think of your CV or resume as like a story to the person reading it. And you're trying to tell them why you're going to solve the problem that they have. Because they have a problem, and that's why they've posted the job. They need someone to do whatever it says. And, unless it's for a very technical scientific role, they don't really care about your publications. It's really heartbreaking to hear that, because you spend so much time, energy, and blood, tears, and sweat on those publications. But they really need to take a back burner on your resume, and it's more about highlighting the skills. I'm sure you all have heard to death about tailoring your resume. It's absolutely true. You need to catch their attention early on and keep it.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So next, wanted to ask Shweta that when she transitioned to her role, Shweta, how did you go about convincing your employer that you would be a good fit for these positions? What were the skills that you highlighted, and what were the skills that you learned during your PhD training that you are still using in your current role?
So Devjan, I will go with the second question first, that
Sure.
what are the skills that I still use? So the skills that I still use are definitely understanding science, right? So what we do is that we liaison with multiple pharmaceutical companies and their products. And then we are trying to understand or leverage what is their benefit versus their competitors, and then trying to highlight those so that the physicians or the patients will definitely prefer this product over any other product in the market. So understanding the science, and then as Canon mentioned, writing and talking about it is very important. So for me, conveying how a cell might differ from a small molecule is sometimes very important to differentiate, because when you're putting a graphic, they might not realize it. Or when we are trying to make an ad, we cannot go out of what is clinically supported by the clinical data. So definitely those are the things that are very important in my role. And one thing is also very important is teamwork, which is obviously coming through from PhD, postdoc, and even here. This is something that I think is very important in whichever part I think you go, or whichever industry you work in, is the teamwork. You should definitely be true to your words. You should always be there to support your team. And I think that is highly appreciated in our industry, both within the company as well as with the clients. And then going back to your first question, that what were the transferable skills that I had highlighted, was that I, again, as Eileen said, that all the publication took the back burner and was a very small component of my second page. So I don't even know whether they saw it or not, but highlighting that I was a team player, I had done my background to be fit for this job, what extra I'm bringing to the plate than what the other PhD postdocs were not bringing to the plate. Highlighting all those transferable skills was the key point in my CV at that point, or the resume at that point.
Okay. And did you have to demonstrate about your writing skills using any of your previous publications, or anything that you have been volunteering, maybe on a forum like STEMPeers, about writing about the latest trends in clinical science or anything like that?
So the procedure for most medcoms is that once you are shortlisted based on your resume, they give you a writing assignment. So that writing assignment can be that they send you a paper and then they ask you to summarize it in maybe even make a PowerPoint summarizing the key takeaways, or maybe write a paragraph about it. So with my first agency, it was making a PowerPoint and demonstrating or highlighting what the key takeaways were. With Dudnik, the process was a little different. The first round was writing an abstract about any latest technology. And then when that was selected, then I was called in for an in-person presentation. So I can again pick up any technology and try to communicate it in the layman terms. And it was like, I was given 30 minutes to do that.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Shweta. So now I will ask Ankit to share with us, like, what has, what kind of skills did he gain during his PhD or postdoctoral training that proved very useful in his current path, and how, like, what are the skills you highlighted in your resume which might help someone land this position?
So mine was a little different because I did a lot of informational interviews with the folks that I currently work with, and even in my previous position within the FDA. And to my surprise, I was actually told that whatever we learn during the grad school or postdoctoral fellowships, that doesn't necessarily translate one-to-one in the kind of work that we do as a regulatory reviewer, because a lot of those things rely upon the regulatory policies and guidances that we generally publish for, like different drug products and stuff like that. So a lot of the, the basic skills come as transferable skills based on what you have done during your PhD or postdocs, or even any other things that you might have think of, they can think of. Just to sort of highlight a couple of points. For example, in my CV, I focused a lot on my regulatory framework related research that I did during the NCI postdoctoral fellowship. And that was kind of highly sought after, or at least it had a one-to-one translation from the research, or rather like the bench, to the regulatory space, because the framework that I kind of worked on was essentially the kind of framework that FDA would use to design some kind of policy or guidance. So that was kind of one of the things that I highlighted. The second thing that kind of came or popped out of my CV was that here at FDA, the CVs are actually long CVs. They are not like 2-page CVs. So they do actually look at the publication records. They do look at the things that you have done. In fact, to the point that they actually want to know what exactly you did that translates into the kind of job that you're about to do. So in a lot of sense, it was more about using my experience and skills that I learned and repackaging it for the kind of job that I might be doing. And that's where I think the informational interviews came handy, because during those informational interviews, I kept asking over and over, what kind of skills do they need? What do they do on a day-to-day basis? And what kind of job tasks do they have to perform? Couple of things based on my short stint or experience that I have so far is that things like you have to be multidisciplinary and multitasker. You have to work on like very, very tight deadlines. You have to work with different disciplinary teams, and you have to be comfortable with reading tons and tons of information, condense it down to the point that you can actually make a decision on the application that has been submitted from the sponsor. So all of that, in some ways, we have been doing even as a graduate student or even during postdoctoral fellowship, we do that, but in a different sort of shape or form, or in a different sort of like setting. So it's more like, you know, rethinking what you have done and trying to apply it in the regulatory setting. And that's where, like I said, the informational interview kind of helped me sort of like think from a different lens, so to speak, as opposed to just looking just as a reviewer for, say, like, you know, if I'm reviewing an article for a journal, or if I'm working as a bench scientist as a postdoctoral fellowship. So it kind of gave me a different perspective.
Sorry, I was mute. So thank you, Ankit. And so in this round, I think we all learned again the importance of tailoring our CV. And if I understood correctly, Ankit suggested that like in FDA, like they prefer more academic style or longer CVs, because I would say like most company resumes are pretty short, right? And where we don't really stress on the publication. So if someone is applying to an FDA position, would you suggest adding all your publications since they are open to a longer CV?
That's true. So it depends on two factors. One is the route that you take to submit your application. And the conventional or the traditional route is to actually apply through the usajobs.gov. And the second route is probably to apply to a direct posting that is generally advertised on different forums like LinkedIn or any other places. So if you are submitting your CV directly to that online posting, I have seen, you know, like from the other side of the fence now, that a lot of CVs come with the typical industry kind of resume, which are like 2 pages or 3 pages at the most. And they tend to be short. They don't necessarily highlight or list all the publications, but the applications that actually come through the usajobs.gov, they have separate sections in which you have to put each and everything that you want to use towards your benefit. And so the applications that come through the usajobs.gov, they are actually more complete and more detailed. And that's the typical sort of expectation from the USFDA, because a lot of those decisions are not really just limited between the hiring manager and the candidate. It has a lot to do with the Office of Personnel Management, and they are used to seeing the CVs in a different format. And if the CV is not designed in that format, they will just reject your application right then and there. So there are certain checks that you have to cross through, or sort of like, you know, pass through when you're applying through that online portal, which is the usajobs.gov. And majority of the GS positions are actually advertised through usajobs.gov.
Thank you, Ankit. So moving on from this topic, I think in the next round, I would like all our panelists to introduce to us how their current positions are related or are in some way to the process of the drug delivery and discovery, and at what stage in the drug development process do they play a role. So we can start with Minji, if you'd like to share with us.
Sure. I would say, you know, it's not as direct. So as a medical science liaison, you know, our primary role is to, as the title suggests, liaise between our, what we call our external customers, which are the physicians, you know, the other healthcare providers, basic researchers that are, you know, part of our territory and our disease states that we cover. And then we also actually think of our internal partners within the company as our customers as well, in a sense, our internal customers, if you will. And so, you know, our job is to kind of bridge the gap between those two groups of people. And so I would say that we have, you know, input into a lot of different parts of the company internally. I mean, just to give some examples, medical science liaisons are usually sitting within the medical affairs organization. That's kind of our place within the company structure. And so, primarily day to day, we probably interact a lot with those physicians or those people. If there's data disclosures for, some of the drugs that we have, our job is to make sure that there's, education around that data, the molecules that we have to our external customers, and of course, answering any questions around those. As well as bringing in insights. So when we, go to meet with a physician, let's say, and we're presenting, one of our recent data disclosures, inevitably they'll have questions that we can answer, some that maybe we can't, and we can bring internally, as well as insights. Clinical insights is what we call them. So, their impressions about the data, or their suggestions on certain subgroup analyses to consider, or suggestions on, what the next trial might be. And so those are all valuable pieces of information that we can bring to our internal colleagues. When it comes to interfacing with our clinical development colleagues, so the people that are working more on trial design, trial conduct throughout, we have opportunities, again, to have interactions and discussions with physicians and researchers externally that can bring in important insights that help shape the design of trials if there are trials that are yet to be started, or again, bring in ideas for future trials that are based on, the data that we have to date. So those are, two examples. There are also, situations in which I think we can collaborate, or we have collaborated with business development colleagues, because sometimes you'll, meet with a researcher and they say that they have, some novel technology that they've worked on, or something, an important finding that they've worked on that they'd like to, speak with someone internally at the company about licensing or doing some sort of collaboration. And so, day to day, it's really different. It's dependent on the needs of both our external and internal customers, but in all those different ways, we can help kind of advance drug discovery and delivery.
Okay, thank you, Minji. So moving on, Eileen, I would like you to introduce to us like your part that you play in the development of the drug.
Sure. So at a small biotech, you have your job title, but ultimately you have to do what needs to get done. There's never enough people to do all the work that there is. But yes, my role is focused on R&D and business development. And in a small company, that group is actually, we work very closely together. In a larger company, they would be completely separate. Well, not completely, but much more separate. So some of the things that I do for R&D include, I'm not at the bench anymore, but I still do a lot of reading the literature, planning experiments, analyzing the data, making the posters, writing the papers. So there's other people, other hands that are doing the science, but I'm still doing a lot of the thinking. And I've learned that that's really important to me, and that's something that I'm definitely going to seek to continue to do. For the business development side, I kind of think about BD for my company in two ways. I mentioned we have 2 clinical stage assets and a platform technology. And so the clinical stage assets are, the 2 antibody radioconjugates that we have in clinical trials. And the clinical team runs, the day-to-day administration of that. But we also often will approach larger companies with a pitch about those assets and say, hey, look at what we've done so far with them. Here's some alignment that we see with these drugs and your existing portfolio. And maybe you'd be interested in licensing some of these assets to add to your portfolio, or even potentially do a combination trial. The other side of BD at our company is around the platform technology. So it's the ability to radio label any sort of targeting agent, protein, antibody with a radioisotope. And so this is based around an asset that doesn't exist yet. So we would approach another company and say, hey, you have this antibody, you have this protein. For example, you tested it in the clinic, you found it to be safe, but it wasn't effective. If you do a partnership with us and radio label your antibody, we think you can increase the potency of your antibody and kind of revitalize your program and bring it back into the clinic. Personally, I like that kind of BD pitching better because I get to be more creative. I get to look at the published papers and figure out what's a good idea and what's not, because people are really busy and they have really good BS detectors. If you have a bad idea, they're not going to give you the time of day. So it has to be a good idea. Yeah, okay.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eileen. So, Kannan, as the Associate Director for Business Development and Licensing, so how would you say your role and your daily job activities are related to drug development, and what stage of drug development is that related to?
I'd say my job and what my colleagues and I do in the office is at the earlier stages of drug development. So if you think discovery of a new target or a new compound, for example, that could inhibit a known target, is the earliest stage. That happens in the research labs at MSK and other institutions. We come in immediately after that, right? So we want to take what's either an idea or a very early stage discovery and see how that can be translated and turned into an actual drug or a product. So I think there's maybe 2 or 3 different ways in which I help translate those. One would be if it's a new idea, if it's a new compound, to help with protecting that idea. So intellectual property is very important for institutions and for companies and for drug development. Without sort of robust intellectual property protection, it's very hard to incentivize a company or anybody for that matter to invest hundreds of millions of dollars to turn your early stage idea into a drug. So we work with our investigators and with outside patent attorneys to protect that idea with patent applications. That process itself takes 3 to 5 years, but so we work with both investigators on the one side and external patent attorneys on the other side. The other thing we do is, like I said, many of these are very early stage technologies. We want to see what we can do to advance this internally before we need to partner with a company. So for example, someone may have found an interesting target and there's a known compound that inhibits it, right? We might hook them up with medicinal chemists or a chemist or a collaborator who's a medicinal chemist to see if they can improve that molecule, right? To turn it drug-like. Maybe this molecule is in the public domain and cannot be patented. Can we improve it? Can we make it, bind the drug better? Can we reduce off-target effects? Is there anything we can do internally? Then other examples might be, if we have data showing this new compound that inhibits cancer cells, for example, in vitro, can we do some in vivo experiments? Can we show animal data, right? So anything to push this along further in the development pipeline before we have to pitch it to somebody. And then the last part is actually once you think you have enough, or we've done as much as we can to market this to potential partners. So you have to understand the technology, understand the problem it's trying to solve, and where it's going to be a good fit. And then you find companies that might be a good fit, see what else they have in their pipeline, and then we would market it to them. And so your communication there becomes very important. Your understanding of the science and communicating to the company, that becomes important. And if a company is interested in the intellectual property, we would negotiate a license agreement or a collaboration agreement to transfer that intellectual property to the company so that they could then turn it into a drug. And then in some cases, if we don't think there's an existing company that is well suited to develop this, we would work with investors and the scientists to form a new company to do this. So we'd form a startup that would go out and develop this technology, bring it to a stage where they might be acquired by a larger company. So I would say earlier in the stages of drug development, drug discovery / drug development, but early in the stages, and again, being in an academic institution, there's only so much you can do. So at some point, our goal is to put this in the hands of people who can turn it into a new drug or a new product.
Okay, thank you, Kannan. And So Shweta, in your current position, so how does your roles and responsibilities in your job relate to the process of drug development and discovery, and how is your company structured, and how does your team fit into the structure and in the process of drug development?
So we don't fit into the process of drug development. We mostly we help the companies launch their product and then sustain them as market leaders. That is where we come into the picture. So so once they know that they have good clinical trial data, that is where we come into the picture and try to build up a story, position them strategically so that they are successful at their launch and then their product is continued to be used.
I see. Okay. Thank you. And lastly, Ankit, I think it would be very interesting the role that you play in the process of drug development being in FDA. So would you like to share a bit more about how your like day looks like, and I mean, what roles do you play in the process of drug development? I'm sure you could talk probably for an hour about that, but.
Yeah, so being in this role, you kind of touch upon literally every stage of the drug development, right from the pre-IND interaction with the sponsor all the way to, I would say, like NDA or BLA approval process, and also for the post-market requirements or post-market commitments that a lot of sponsors have to sort of follow through. And also for any of the supplemental applications that eventually come back with like a different indication or different formulation and stuff like that. So there's a whole breadth of the like drug development process that I, in my role, actually support. And so I can't really pinpoint one particular process at a time, but in general, like, typically we don't really have like one person assigned to say like, one particular process or one particular application or one particular drug, so to speak, So the way our job is divided is probably based on the workload that we have. And in a typical day, we probably, like look for the events. I like to call them events, but yeah, like mostly the meetings that we have to attend. And those meetings are primarily targeted to discuss different applications that at the moment you are handling. And so that's how the day is mostly sort of like, navigated through. It's mostly driven, like I said, by the calendar and the events that you have on your calendar, as opposed to deciding what do you want to do next, or what are you going to do, like say 2 hours down the road. A lot of the discussions happen internally because the decisions that we make have to be a unanimous decision depending on different divisions and different sort of colleagues that are working on that application. So it's a lot of internal discussion on both emails and WebEx. So, like we meet almost every day discussing different applications at a different time. And then eventually, once we have a unanimous decision on an application, we eventually convey that to the sponsor. It can be communicated in a different format. So it could be a communication via TCON, like a teleconference. It could be communicated via written response. Given the current situation, we don't really allow sponsors a face-to-face meeting, but there could be a face-to-face meeting as well. So there's a lot of interaction between the sponsors and the agency that I take part. But apart from that, on a day-to-day basis, like I said, like it's more about working and sort of like chipping through the workload that you have, and essentially discussing whatever issues or deficiencies you have that you would like to get resolved by discussing within different like teams that you are assigned to. And then this is kind of like the bread and butter. And apart from that, let's say like you sort of have a lessons learned based on multiple applications that you have reviewed, you kind of like pitch into the guidance development or something that materializes into a policy that applies to a broader sort of like category of drugs or a class of drugs. So that kind of opportunity occur after, say, like you have had multiple applications and you have developed a good handle on, say, like one particular class of drugs. But yeah, like I said, like there's a whole breadth of the drug development process that we are involved in. Both, like even in my previous role as a toxicologist, I did the same thing. And even in my current reviewer position as a clinical pharmacologist, I pretty much get myself into different stages of the application at a different time.
Thank you so much, Ankit. That was very interesting. So before I proceed with further questions, let me ask Taliana. I think we are almost it's almost 6:30, right? So before starting another round of questions, should we wait for the breakout room or?
Yeah, how about if you just had one question you wanted to ask to one or two people in the last 3 or 4 minutes?
Sure. Okay. Then I'll go ahead. So, Minji, I wanted to ask you, what would be the normal career trajectory once you start as an MSL? So, can MSL be an entry-level position? And if so, then what would be the career progression?
Sure. So most MSL organizations have several levels, just even within the MSL role. So, you have a MSL1 or entry-level MSL, you'll have, a senior MSL, and sometimes you have a third level. So I think that's kind of the natural, most common progression, maybe the most straightforward progression. And then usually within an MSL organization, you have, as you guys probably know, everyone is split up by territory. So you're living across the country, covering your, specific geographic region. And then there's generally, I guess, mid-level managers that manage regions, usually three regions. So one in the West, one in Central, and one in the East that manages the MSLs within that region. So that's another, potential next step for our people who are interested in staying within the MSL kind of field, but not doing the day-to-day work of an MSL. But I would also say that, I've seen a lot of my MSL colleagues also jump to, completely different positions within pharma. A lot of people taking internal roles and other medical affairs jobs, clinical development, business development, regulatory. And I think that might be a little bit, I guess, dependent on the company culture as well. If they're, they're open to letting people kind of move within, the company and try different roles. But yeah, I mean, I feel like once you're in, there's a lot of opportunities that are opened up to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so Eileen, how would you describe like a career trajectory in your current profession? And
Yeah, I think because my role is kind of a hybrid between R&D, it kind of depends if kind of what direction I go in. I think staying in this hybrid role and advancing, I can probably only go so far, and then I'm eventually going to need to choose which area to focus in. But in a small biotech, I think you really could kind of wear both hats for quite a while. And I guess now that I think about it, our chief scientific officer is obviously highly involved in R&D and the science. But as a publicly traded company, he's very often interacting with investors and participating in the outreach to companies. And so he really does a fair amount of BD. So maybe I'm revising my question, my answer. That if I stay in a small company, I can probably just kind of advance as some of a hybrid role. But if I were to go to a bigger company, I mean, again, I've never been in a bigger company, so I'm not certain, but my sense is that you do need to specialize more.
okay, great. Thank you, Eileen.
Okay, so I think it's just 6:30 now, so I'd like to thank Debanjana for leading this fantastic panel discussion. All of the 5 panelists gave really useful advice that we would like to continue to discuss in the speed networking session.